In this episode, we're going to be covering very basic pickups which can be used for things like score or even things like healing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the basic character that we just set up and we're going to add some things to it. So what we want to do is go into the third person character. So for this pickup, I'm just going to do a score and then we'll cover health in the next episode. So what we're going to do is open up the character, and then on the left you'll be able to see a little bit down is a drop down menu called variables. So you'll see a couple of things in there. Those are just the components that are already in the character, but we want to add a variable and we want to call this score or something that you like to call it. And then what we want to do is change this to an integer. So there are two main ways of having numbers in your game, which are integer and float. There are some cases where float would be useful, where if you wanted to have like a smooth animation or a smooth sort of movement of something, which we will cover later on in our platforming tutorial. But for now, we want whole numbers, which are integers, because we don't want to have what's called a floating point error. So if we click integer, then we've got whole numbers where it'll just be 1, 2, 3, 4, so on. And then we've got that score there. So what we want to then do is we want to make a new blueprint. So if I go to the base folder of content, let's make things neat and have things exactly where we want them to be. If I call a folder blueprints, and then within this I'm going to have an empty actor. So I'm going to call this BP for blueprint underscore pickup. So then in this I'm going to set up a pickup for me to be able to interact with. So first of all, I want to add a base mesh. So this might be where you make your own custom mesh, but just for the sake of prototyping it, I'm going to put in a sphere. So basic sphere there. I want to turn off the collision because I don't want to be able to like sort of walk on or glitch out the pickup. So I'm going to take off the collision on this, and I'm going to add a sphere collision that is childed to that. So how I did that was I just dragged that onto the sphere and it's become a child. What this will do, so if I increase the sphere radius of this sphere to maybe 75, so it's a little bit larger than the sphere, this will mean that the player doesn't particularly have to fully hit the sphere, just be near enough to it that it picks it up. And then if I then move this sphere around, so I can have this sphere animated, I can have it bobbing up and down, and the pickup radius will still stick with it. What I want to do then is rename this just for the sake of keeping things neat, and I'm going to call that player detect for the radius that's around it. What we then want to do is go to the event graph, and then on begin overlap of this pickup, I want to do something. So what we want to do, we only want the player to be able to pick up this pickup. So the other actor, I want to be cast to BP underscore third person character, or whatever your player's blueprint is called. I want to cast to it. What this essentially does is communicates to the blueprint that is the other actor and says, are you the third person character? If it's true, it'll run this line of code. If it's false, then it'll do cast failed and it'll do something else. So we're not going to link anything up, so if it's not the character, don't do anything, but if it is, then we want to do something. So if we go back to the third person character, what I want to do is we're going to start looking into functions. What functions are is essentially just the event graph itself, but a nice condensed version of it, just so you can keep things nice and simple. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a function and I'm going to call it add score. What we then can do is click on this first input sort of node that gets made, and we want to add an input to it. So all it'll do currently, once we set it up, is run this code and it'll run through that, but we want to be able to input a value. So if I press plus on the right here and do inputs, and then we call this value, change that to an integer, and then what we can do is we want to get the current score value, we want to set the score value, and then what we want to do is add the value of the pickup to the score. So if I do a plus node and then set them up there, what this will do is when we do the pickup, I want to run this add score function. I want to input a number of the value of the pickup, and then I want to add that to my score. We want to do this add to the current score value, otherwise it'll just override it with whatever value it is. We want to keep adding up that value. So if we go back to the pickup here, what we then can do, make sure we've compiled that, yep. So we can drag off as third person character. This allows us to run things inside of other blueprints. So because we've got the third person character, I can do add score, and I've got this function here. And then I can input a value. So it might be that you've got a very set value for this pickup, and you can input a number, so maybe 10, and you've got a value of 10. Whereas if you want maybe a random number, you want it all to be randomized, we can do random integer in range, and then you can set that range. So you could do it from a range of 5 to 10, for instance. But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to have it a solid number of 10. And then currently we don't have UI set up. That's going to be in the next episode. So a way to test this is to just have it in the third person character. This is a quick way to debug things, just to test if things are working, test what's happening as certain things happen. So on an event tick, so this will run every single frame of the game. And then we want to do a print string. So this will run a line of text at the top left of the screen. You can see that. If I extend this and set the duration to 0, this will mean that it's always on the screen. Otherwise you'll have a big string of them going down the screen. And then score, we want to link that up to hello, and then it'll to the in string where it default says hello. And then if you do that, it'll do the conversion node as well. So with this, I can drag a couple into the scene, and we can test that out, and then we can look into adding some very quick animation. So you can see in the top left, you can see the number is going up as I'm walking into these pickups. What we want to do is then destroy the pickup once this is done, so I'll add that after this. But you can see that the number is going up as I'm walking into the pickups. So if we go back to here, so what we want to do is once you've overlapped it and you've added the score, then destroy self. So if we just do destroy actor, and then the target will be self, and then that pickup will get destroyed, but it'll add the score first. What we then can do is on a timeline, so if you just right click anywhere empty and search timeline, it'll be the very bottom thing, but it'll say add timeline with a little clock icon. What we then want to do is maybe call it pickup movement or anything that you're fine with, and then open this up by double clicking it, and then it'll open this little secondary window here. And then what we can do is start adding things for it to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rotation. Actually, first of all, just to keep it neat, we're going to add the bobbing, that'll be up and down, and then the rotation on here. And then I want this to work over a 4-second duration, so put the length to 4 seconds. Always make sure that the total length is always the same length as the final time that you've got set. Otherwise you'll just have a long period of it doing nothing, and then it'll start going again. So what we want to do is hold shift and then click, and you can start adding keyframes into the sort of graph. But I'm going to just add one at the start, one in the middle somewhere, because we're going to manually change that, and then we're going to add one for the end. So I'm going to drag select the first keyframe and set both of those to 0. Make sure when you are typing it, you are pressing enter. If you don't press enter, it doesn't apply that change. On this last one, I'm going to add the time as 4, and I'm going to add the value as 0. So it's going to go back to that, and then when it loops, it'll start doing the same thing again. If I click both of these arrows at the top here, it'll sort of scale it to fit what we've got here. And then on this, we're going to do 2, and we're going to do it as 50. So what we're going to have it is going up and down, and the top value is going to add 50 to the location of the sphere pickup. and then it's going to go back down. If I drag select all of these, I can make this a smooth animation. Just clicking auto will do what we want, where it'll slowly do it nice and smoothly, rather than it being a very sharp sort of animation. What we then want to do is a rotation. So I want to do 0 and 0, and then hold shift, click, put that as 4, and do the value as 360. When this loops back around, 360 is essentially the same as 0, so it'll just very smoothly do it. You don't want to add this curve, so I don't want to do auto on this, because it'll look very strange. What you want is a nice linear smooth rotation, so you just want to keep that as that is. So we can close this window now, and now you can see we've got 2 floats that we're working with. So what we want to do on the update, we want to set relative, hold on, on the sphere, so drag the sphere in from the left, and then set relative location and rotation. What we then want to do is right click this location and rotation pin, so just right click on where it's the yellow and the sort of purplish bluish circles. We want to right click that and then split. What this will allow us to do is put raw floats in rather than having to have the vectors and things like that. So the bobbin, I know this is going to be the Z is up and down in Unreal, and then rotation is going to be the yaw, so the Z is sort of going around in that way. So from this, that would then do it. What we want to do is, I missed one thing, is double click on this timeline again, and at the top you'll be able to see sort of play icon with a lightning bolt in it. This will auto play, so we don't need to link it up to a begin play or anything. And then a sort of looped arrow that'll add a loop, so it'll keep running. So what we should then see are these bobbing up and down, and you would see them spinning, but they are spherical, so you can't really see that. But when we walk into them, they then destroy themselves, but they add to the score there. So this is a tutorial to very quickly make some pickups in your game.